The Toronto Maple Leafs, they won over the weekend as well. They win 3-1 over the New York Islanders. It was 3-1, and they didn't blow a lead. They held on. And it actually comes after a loss we remember from earlier in the week against the New York Rangers, where they blew a lead. And Sheldon Keefe called out his players, basically feeling they were soft and purposeless against the New York Rangers. What did you think of that comment from Sheldon Keefe? And do you think Chief Keefe got the desired effect from his comment in the way that the Leafs played on Saturday?
Yeah, I think there's a couple things here. Like Sheldon Keefe post game, he can be very direct and even just like a touch emotional. Like he can, it's not to say he doesn't mean what he says there, because I do believe he meant that. But the problem is, in any Canadian market where there's a lot of attention on the team, like everyone just clips out soft in particular and then extrapolates that to mean exactly as they want to say. They were soft when they blew a 3-1 lead to the Canadians in the playoffs. They were soft in Boston in 2018 or whatever. Like, whereas basically it gives everyone sort of license to run with how they want. I mean, in Sheldon Keefe, to his defense, did clarify when he spoke to the media a day or two later, sort of what he meant by that, sort of soften their approach. But I also view it as like it's gone pretty well in Toronto. Like, I was just saying, we don't even talk about the Leafs on the podcast because there really hasn't been any calamity.
Yeah, it's kind of weird.
You know what I mean? Like they've won, when he made that comment, they'd won 22 of 30 games going back to October. So he hasn't had many chances to use the stick against him, if you know what I mean. Like even in practice or what have you, there hasn't, when you're a coach, I think you almost get nervous sometimes that your players do get soft when things are coming easy, when it's rolling, that maybe bad habits are creeping in or this or that. And because they'd blown a series of leads going back to the game in Colorado, Vegas, St. Louis, some of those games they pulled out a win, but they blew leads in those games. And then to see it again after building a 3-0 lead against the Rangers last Wednesday, I think he saw it as an opportunity to, try to get everyone's attention. And he got tons of attention. I'm sure he loved the response. I mean, that was a pretty thorough win against the Islanders on Saturday. And, the Leafs are in an interesting spot, as I mentioned, just because, they're kind of cruising around the top of the league, 5th in points percentage in the NHL. They're in this murderer's row division. Like right now, they're 5th overall in the league and they're 3rd in the division. So because of the divisional playoff format, they would be opening right now if the playoffs started in Tampa on the road in round 1. And so I think that there's going to be a real push internally to try to win the division, just to have the best possible odds in your favor. If you face a game 7, to know it'll be on home ice, all those types of things. But, I think it'll be a louder second half around the Leafs, I guess, than the first, because other than the first 2 weeks of the season when they really stumbled and everyone was going crazy here, it's been pretty quiet around this team. Everything's sort of coming easy. I hate to say that. I'm sure they're working hard, but it looks like it's coming too easy for them at times. And I think that's probably why when things were sliding a bit, that Sheldon Keefe delivered that punch, I guess, sent his message.
It is interesting that we haven't talked. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I think we've talked about the Leafs like kind of here and there, but there's just been so much with the Edmonton Oilers. We talked about the Canadiens and their GM search, and obviously other things have just kind of been sprinkled in here and there. And like after the Leafs, it kind of looked like they were on shaky ground to start, and then they kind of went on that run partway through the year. And even when they were going through those blown leads, I don't think we hammered on them enough. No. It is interesting that the Leafs are going through what they're going through. And I don't know. I find like I expected a situation where the Leafs would essentially maybe go on a run where things would just not go well and maybe a panic move would happen, but none of that has happened yet. And I think the Leafs are just saying like, no, this is the core we have in place. We're just going to stay by them and just in the hopes of running it back. Hopefully we finally achieve some success. But yeah,
I can explain why we haven't talked about him. It's because we all know deep down that the playoffs will be measuring how this season is viewed. I mean, this is the 5th season essentially where the Leafs have been a top 5 NHL team. Like if you look over the last 5 years in the regular season, they've been right near the top of the league, basically consistently. They did have one little swoon before Mike Babcock was fired a couple of years ago, but even after Sheldon Keefe took over, they won like 15 to 20 games. And so we've seen this before. Austin Matthews, we've seen him score a boatload of goals, which he's done this season. William Nylander, John Tavares, all having great offensive seasons. They've had some nice stories, like Michael Bunting's produced really well on a cheap contract playing on their top line. Like there's really lots, Morgan Riley's having a great year. Honestly, since he signed his contract, he's been awesome. Jack Campbell's been one of the stories of the league. I know he's struggled a bit more recently, but becoming an all-star. So the point is everyone's heard all the good stories about the Leafs. And it's almost a little unfair. Like when you look at and I'm not saying this just conspires against the Leafs. It's unfair to Boston and Tampa and Florida too, that you basically have 4 of the top 10 teams in the league that all have to go through each other just by the way this format works. Like in the old days, if there was just the top 8 in the Eastern Conference, I think the path would be a little bit clearer, easier, however you want to look at it. But the Leafs will be judged by that first round series. And it's going to be against Tampa or Boston or Florida in all likelihood, unless they win the division and get a crossover or something. But more than likely, they're going to be playing one of those 3 teams, and they're all really good teams. And they're all teams that want to win a Stanley Cup and could win a Stanley Cup if things go their way. And I think that's why we're not talking about them. Honestly, I think it's just like, wake us up when we get to the trade deadline, see what you do there. We'll analyze that. And then wake us up when you get to the playoffs and see how you handle round 1.
By the way, just because CJ's saying what he's saying about the Leafs, Leafs fans who watch this podcast, please continue to watch this podcast, because we will find ways to talk about the Leafs before the playoffs begin. Just because this regular season doesn't really matter in the grand scheme of things does not mean we won't talk about the Toronto Maple Leafs. But also to everyone else who kind of looks at us and thinks like, stop talking so much about the Leafs. We'll find a way to talk about your team too. Like if you're the Vancouver Canucks and you find yourself
in a position the Canucks, we've hammered the Canadians, we hammered the Oilers.
Too.
I mean, like we've gone deep on all those teams. We've ignored Ottawa and Winnipeg, not on purpose, but we haven't given them as much love. But I mean, there's been enough fires around Canada that we've been tending to those.